At first, it sounded like a joke. Now it sounds like a plan. Donald Trump, the current U.S. president, has long and confidently repeated that there will be no third term. The Constitution allows for 2 terms, no more. He openly acknowledged this, but the tone has clearly begun to change. Short winks from the stage, ironic remarks, hints. And now, harsh statements from his closest allies. A topic that was taboo just yesterday has burst onto the agenda, from never to why not, one political cycle. And with that, questions arise. Will American democracy survive? And is Trump himself ready to play by the established rules? Today, Trump sits confidently in the Oval Office. His triumphant return has taken place. His supporters see this as a mandate from the people and are already figuring out how to extend it beyond the constitutional limit. Opponents respond harshly. The very question of a third term violates the norms laid down by the Founding Fathers. Formally, the president has not announced his intention to remain after 2028, but the rhetoric is changing. Words are becoming more ambiguous, pauses longer, and formulations more cautious. And allies are saying aloud what they used to whisper behind closed doors. The joke has turned into a signal. The signal has turned into a scenario, and now it is being discussed seriously. In the first months of his second presidency, Trump sought to dispel fears that he would try to usurp power longer than allowed. In interviews and speeches in March 2025, he stated outright that he respects the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, which limits the president to 2 terms, and has no plans to violate it. For example, back in the spring, Trump told reporters,
So many people want me to do it. I have never had requests so strong as that. I don't know if that's constitutional that they're not allowing you to do, but this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4.
emphasizing that he only expects to remain in power for 8 years. I will have 8 years as president, 2 terms, he assured his voters at the time, making it clear that he did not intend to run for a 3rd term. Similar assurances had been made before. Even during the 2024 election campaign, speculation about Trump's possible desire to remain in the presidency longer than allowed raised questions among journalists. At the time, the Republicans' associates explained such talk by saying that Trump was just joking, teasing his opponents. The candidate himself did indeed occasionally make ironic comments on this topic. For example, at a rally back in 2020, while serving his first term as president, he told a cheering crowd,
52 days from now, we're going to win Nevada, and we're going to win 4 more years in the White House. And then after that, we'll negotiate, right? Because we're probably, based on the way we were treated, we're probably entitled to another 4 after that.
With such phrases, Trump seemed to be winking at his supporters, saying, why not stay longer if people want to? At the Republican Party convention in August 2020, the audience went even further. To the applause of the delegates, they chanted 12 more years. And Trump himself picked up on this slogan with a smile, noting that such chants would drive his opponents crazy. However, at the time, all this was officially presented as a joke, a hyperbole designed to provoke liberal critics. After returning to the White House following the 2024 election, the president continued to play on this line, both seriously and jokingly. In January 2025, at a rally in Las Vegas, he allowed himself an ambiguous phrase. It would be my greatest honor to serve not 1, but 2, or 3 or 4 terms. After which, however, he added with a laugh, no, just 2 after all. A few days later, speaking before Republican congressmen, Trump again touched on the topic of term limits. I don't think they'll let me run again. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to run again? He asked the audience with feigned bewilderment, eliciting laughter from the crowd. Such remarks essentially served as a trial balloon. Trump was accustomed to throwing out provocative ideas in a joking manner to accustom his audience to previously unthinkable possibilities. Over time, jokes that seemed innocent at first glance began to take on a more serious tone. If earlier it was possible to dismiss it by saying, the president is just playing to the crowd, don't take it literally. Then in 2025, the situation changed. By the end of March, Trump had made a statement that left little room for doubt. He was indeed considering the possibility of remaining in power for a 3rd term. In an interview with NBC News on March 30th, 2025, the president went beyond his usual jokes. Responding to a direct question about his ambitions to remain in office after the end of his 2nd term, Trump emphasized, I'm not joking. The phrase sounded almost mundane, but in the context of talk of a third term, it became a political bombshell. For the first time, the head of state made it clear without a smile that the idea of extending his stay in the White House was no longer taboo for him. Moreover, in the same interview, Trump hinted that there are ways to make it happen. In other words, there are allegedly ways to circumvent the current constitutional ban. He did not go into details, noting that it's too early to think about it. Nevertheless, the very appearance of such reasoning at the highest level caused a serious reaction in Washington. For the first time, a sitting president publicly admitted the idea of looking for legal loopholes that would allow him to remain in power, despite the direct wording of the amendment. According to press reports, various scenarios were indeed discussed in private conversations between Trump and his inner circle. One such scenario involved the nomination of a nominal Republican candidate in 2028, with Trump himself as vice president. After winning, the president-elect would immediately resign, and the vice president, meaning Trump, would take over. Formally, this would appear to be a way of not violating the letter of the 22nd Amendment. He would not be re-elected president. But it would clearly contradict its spirit. This is a theoretical, almost absurd scenario. Many lawyers have pointed out a possible conflict with the 12th Amendment and other constitutional obstacles. The main point, however, is that the very fact that such options are being discussed openly means that the groundwork for a radical revision of the rules is being laid openly. It is noteworthy that, at the same time as these discussions were taking place, the president continued to make contradictory statements, apparently in an attempt to maintain a balance. On board Air Force One on the same day, March 30th, Trump told reporters that many people were asking him to run again, but emphasized,
We have a long time. We have almost 4 years to go, and that's a long time. But despite that, so many people are saying, you've got to run again. They love the job we do. Most importantly, they love it.
At the same time, he denied that he had already taken any steps to prepare for a third campaign. I've never looked into it. They say there's a way, but I personally haven't looked into it. A month later, in May 2025, the president tried to tone down the discussion altogether, saying, "That's not what I want. As far as I know, it's not allowed." Trump assured that he was only counting on a successful second term. "I will be an 8-year president. I will be a 2-term president." However, a caveat in the same speech. "There are ways to do it, I just don't consider them." Made it clear once again that the topic was not closed. This dual behavior, hints and digressions, joking statements mixed with serious ones, is characteristic of Trump's style. He often tests the waters by throwing out provocative ideas under the guise of a joke and then watching the reaction. And if the reaction is favorable, or at least does not lead to catastrophic consequences, the joke gradually turns into a real plan. As observers note, such tactics allow one to shift the Overton window, that is, to make the previously unthinkable acceptable for discussion. Just a couple of years ago, it was politically taboo to seriously talk about a third term for the US president, but today this idea is openly discussed not only on marginal internet forums, but also in the mainstream media. Donald Trump's closest associates have played a special role in legitimizing the topic of a third term. While the president himself has been cautious in his statements on the matter, his aides and right-wing ideologues have been more assertive. They are clearly testing public opinion and preparing a base among supporters for a potentially unprecedented move. A real information explosion occurred after a statement made by Steve Bannon, Trump's former chief strategist. In an interview with The Economist magazine,
well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president 28, and people just ought to get accommodated. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28.
In fact, one of Trump's closest associates openly stated that a strategy is already being developed to bring Donald Trump back to the Oval Office after the next election cycle, despite the Constitution's explicit prohibition. Bannon, known for his ultra-conservative views and ability to formulate provocative ideas, even resorted to an almost mystical justification for this plan. He called Donald Trump an instrument of divine will and claimed that the American people allegedly demand the continuation of Trump's rule. According to Bannon, the country needs at least one more term from the current president, and a plan to circumvent legal restrictions is already in place and will be revealed at the appropriate time.
finish what we started. And the way we finish it through Trump. Trump is a vehicle. I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence. He's an instrument.
His rhetoric also contained a peculiar challenge to the letter of the law. If the American people support Trump with all available mechanisms, does that not mean that the will of the people is more important than formal constitutional norms? If Americans use their mechanisms to return Trump to office, are they tearing up the Constitution? Asked the former president's ideologue. This line of thinking echoes Trump's own view, who often places his own understanding of the will of the people above institutions and rules. Even before Bannon's statement, some Republicans had begun to lay the groundwork at the legislative level. In the early days of Trump's second term, Tennessee Congressman Andy Ogles introduced a symbolic resolution proposing to relax the term limit specifically for the incumbent president. Of course, such an idea has virtually no chance of success. Changing the Constitution would require the support of an overwhelming majority of lawmakers and states, which is impossible under current conditions. However, the very fact of such an initiative is telling. Some of Trump's fellow party members are willing to at least discuss what was previously unthinkable, viewing their leader as an exception to the rule who, in their opinion, can be allowed more than others. There are also attempts to find loopholes in the text of the 22nd Amendment. Trump's supporters point out, for example, that his 2 terms are not consecutive. There was a 4-year break between them. They say that the text of the amendment does not specify that the terms must be consecutive for the ban to take effect. Perhaps since there was a break, the restriction does not apply? However, constitutional lawyers strongly disagree with this. The amendment is clearly worded. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, regardless of whether the terms are consecutive or not. Even if in theory Trump tries to claim the right to a new term on the grounds that his terms were interrupted, the courts are unlikely to accept such an argument. In essence, this is more political rhetoric than a viable legal position. The tradition of 2 presidential terms originated with Washington and became law after the Roosevelt precedent. In 1951, the 22nd Amendment established the limit of 2 terms. Since then, it has not been questioned. Now, Donald Trump is testing this framework. His path from a firm no to hints and statements from allies looks like a test of the strength of institutions. Changing the amendment is practically impossible. It requires a qualified majority in Congress and ratification by 3/4 of the states. Attempts to find loopholes threaten a constitutional crisis and probably a Supreme Court hearing because the literal text of the amendment leaves no room for maneuver. Even the rhetoric about a 3rd term undermines the norm of replaceability. A 2nd-term president is usually considered a lame duck, but hints of continuation turn time into a lever of pressure on the party, opponents, and external actors. It is at this crossroads that a figure emerges who claims to set the counter-agenda for the coming years. "I'm not done yet," Kamala Harris says after her defeat in 2024, and it sounds less like consolation and more like a declaration to continue the fight. The subtext is confidence. The first female president of the United States is inevitable, and it could very well be her. Harris demonstratively disregards the instant numbers of the polls, appealing to the long-term demands of voters and the lessons of the past campaign. She is well aware of the context: an extremely compressed start after Biden's departure, defeat by the Trump-Vance tandem, a pause for a memoir tour, and groundwork with a promise not to run until 2026. All of which reads as a conservation of resources and a restructuring for 2028. At the same time, she sharply criticizes Trump, warning about the risks of authoritarianism and pressure on institutions and the media. Society reacts in 2 ways. For some, she is a symbol of hope and the glass ceiling. For others, she is the voice of a disgruntled loser. But the fact remains, Harris is becoming the figurehead of the next cycle, around whom the opposition will rally. And it is her presence that is bringing the debate about norms from the abstract realm into the practical realm of the upcoming elections, where the question of the replaceability of power ceases to be a theory and becomes a concrete choice. The emergence of a figure like Harris is important. It brings the debate about norms back to a human scale and shows that this story involves not only abstract institutions but also specific political actors. But paradoxically, this makes the main conclusion even clearer. Personalities change, but the central intrigue remains the same. What will happen to the norm of changeability when it is systematically tested for strength? The legal chances of a third term are negligible. The text of the 22nd Amendment is clear, and the route for its revision is practically closed. However, politics lives not only by articles but also by assumptions. The game of hints is already paying dividends. It blurs the boundaries of what is possible and turns talk of a second term into leverage over the party, institutions, and external actors. This is the bottom line. Trump continues to test the limits of what is permissible, turning the constitutional norm into a field for tactical maneuvers. The response of the system, from the elite to the voter, will show what is stronger in American politics at the end of the decade. The ambition of one leader or the rule that has kept power within 2 terms for 7 decades.